couple of quick announcements before we get going. Remind everybody, especially the folks who are here for the first time, a little coupon here will get you out of the parking ramp for free. The club gives you a couple hours. With that said, if you came here at 8 this morning and you leave at 5 and you hand them this thing, it's not going to be quite as good enough to get you out. But with that said, at your table we have the little parking ticket. As we've done in the past, video this event, and you can see it on clube.com. I see Blake over there. Wave to the crowd, Blake. That's Blake. Don't see Michael, but Michael and Blake, oh, there's over there. Didn't see you, sorry. And then we're also doing something new. This time we're doing a dry run on a webcast. And so in the future, it's possible that we might be doing a webcast of the event. And John, wave to the crowd. John is helping us out with that. And so if you have corporate events that you want to do video stuff, Blake and Michael can help. If you have corporate events where you want to do webinar, live casting, live streaming stuff, John can help you with that. And then as a parting gift for the day, you have these lovely pens that the nice folks at Sunbelt have provided, and they are out at the table. So if you need a new pen to hit the ground running as we all get back to school and get working again after our summer vacations, you can get a pen from, again, the folks at Sunbelt. Today's event is Take Control of Your Successful Exit, and it is co-hosted by Upsize Minnesota as well as Club Entrepreneur. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rick Brimacombe, and on behalf of the Minneapolis Club, our partner here, Upsize Magazine, and my group, Club Entrepreneur, welcome to our panel. Estimates suggest that about 4.5 million businesses representing about $10 trillion in business value will transition over the next decade or so, and industry observers believe that only about 20 to 30% of those businesses that go to market will actually end up selling. Every business owner leaves their business someday, so the question is, how are you going to leave your business? Are you going to take control of that sale and exit, or is that going to just happen to you? To help business owners better understand the transition process, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur have assembled today's panel, and I will introduce this panel of experts who can serve as your trusted advisors. Upsize Minnesota is a how-to business magazine devoted to helping business owners build bigger and more profitable companies. And Club Entrepreneur and my firm, Brimacombe & Associates, inspire business owners like you to achieve more than you thought possible by helping refine strategies, assemble resources, and secure funding. In our effort to provide actionable content, Upsize Minnesota and Club Entrepreneur offer you today's panel, and as such, I'd like you to meet our event sponsors. Working from my immediate left and down the line, we have DS&B, we have Sunbelt Business Advisors, Highland Bank, and L. Harris Partners. Tech Guru is a sponsor, and as of a couple of hours ago, I was trading emails with Dan Moshe, fully expecting him to be here. He was fully expecting him to be here, so checking my phone, haven't seen anything, so as of right now, unless he comes riding in, riding be the keyword because he does have a motorcycle, so he might come racing in here with his motorcycle gear on, but Dan Moshe and Tech Guru is our other sponsor. So with that, let me introduce our panelists. Sean Boland is Managing Principal at DS&B. Peggy DeMuse is a business broker at Sunbelt Business Advisors. Melissa Johnson is VP of Business Banking at Highland Bank, and Tom Siders is a partner at L. Harris Partners. Now that we've been introduced to everyone, and I would say that I've personally had an opportunity to work with all their firms and with all the individuals up here in the panel. They, I know, will do a good job on the panel today, as well as helping you in the future if you could use their services. And so with that as a background, why don't you all tell me just a little bit about your own background, kind of in your own words, and let's start with you, Sean.
Hi, I'm Sean Boland, DS&B. We're a local CPA firm. We deal in the Twin Cities normally. We've been around since the early 50s. What makes us different than other people? CPA, connected, proactive, and accessible. Connected to our clients. We tend to meet our clients 3 or 4 times a year, plus their board of advisors, their financial planner, banker, attorney, that kind of stuff. Do a lot more proactive planning, which goes into proactive. In our world, surprises are normally not good. Nobody likes getting an IRS notice. Nobody likes saying they owe $50,000 on April 10th, due in 5 days. And so part of our planning is you would have known about that 6 months prior to that, or 9 months prior to that, or we would have some good advice going that direction. Accessible, 24 hours, return phone calls, emails, and texts. Not only did you get that notice saying that you owed $50,000, then the CPA isn't answering the phone for the next week. And so that's not us. We're in a service industry. We need to return phone calls, text, emails ASAP.
Great, thank you, Sean. Peggy.
I'm Peggy DeMuse with Sunbelt Business Brokers, and we are the largest business brokerage firm in the world. We have about 50 people here in our local Minneapolis-St. Paul office that all works together to help business owners when it comes time to sell their business. So by background, I'm a CPA by background, recovering, and have worked in a number of larger corporations as well as some small businesses. So it's been a good background for doing what we do. Right now, I guess I would just let everybody know that the market is super hot. Most good businesses that are coming in are selling fairly quickly and generally with multiple offers. So that's been it's been a seller's market for a while, but it's interesting on how over the last quarter it seems to have really jumped. So that's something new in our world.
And then Peggy, any industry verticals that you specialize in or the firm specializes in?
Yeah, we really are, industry agnostic. It's really about the pressure, or the not the pressure. What's the word I'm looking for? The systems that we've used and what we've put together in the process that we go through to actually get a business on the market and get it sold. Similar to Sean's comment, it's really important that we do a deep dive early on and that the seller really understands the triggers in his business as well as what might be required when it comes time to due diligence. So again, it's a very strict process. We really enforce that, and it really doesn't matter what industry.
Great, thank you. Melissa.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Melissa Johnson, and I'm the Vice President of Business Banking at Highland Bank, and it's a family-owned community bank focused on business lending. I started my career at a bank holding company where we were in the acquisition mode, and over the course of 3 years looked at 5 banks and ended up buying 2. And since 2007, I've been on the front line working with business owners every day, celebrating their successes and brainstorming their challenges and opportunities, and it's a privilege to be here this morning. Personally, I grew up on a farm in southern Minnesota, and I now live in Minnetonka with my husband, 3 kids, and a dog.
And what's the dog's name?
Scout. She's actually at the vet today.
And it was a big back to school in your family. Did it happen yet?
It has not, and they're thankful with the weather this week. They're going to be outside every day till Tuesday.
All right, great. Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Siders from L. Harris Partners. I started my business career with the CPA firm that used to be known as McGladrey, and now it's another 3-letter acronym, RSM, I think. Unlike her, life began for me when the kids went to college and the dog died. And about that time I decided maybe it was time to hang it up and smell the roses. And my wife tells me it lasted 2 weeks and that I had vacuumed the carpet 12 out of 14 days. It's time for me to go find something to do. So another McGladrey partner of mine and I started the practice about 8 years ago. We're having a blast. We decided to focus on what we think is one of the biggest needs in this country that's not being addressed, which is helping closely held businesses figure out what they're going to do with their business and how they should get out and how to grow the value between today's value and the number they need to have the lifestyle they want when that once-in-a-lifetime event happens. So our primary focus here is in Minnesota, but we have helped businesses all over the country.
Great, thank you. And as I mentioned, Dan being a motorcycle rider, just came screaming in, although he ditched his gear. Dan Moshe, tell us 1 minute, a little bit about your background and the firm. We're just started.
Awesome. Hello, Dan Moshe. So I founded Tech Guru, the carrying technology company, about 13 years ago, based in Northeast Minneapolis. We're the IT department for 65 companies in kind of all around the Midwest, and grew mostly working with businesses, nonprofits, in almost every single sector. Now we're switching to a focus. We love all of our existing clients, but now we're focusing on IT services for CPA firms specifically, and found that by focusing on a specific niche, we can serve them better and go national, in fact. I also help companies implement the EOS, Entrepreneurial Operating System, found in the book called Traction. We use that system at Tech Guru. It works so well that I nearly worked myself out of a job. Also, my connection to the M&A conversation today is not only in guiding Tech Guru clients through the technology aspects of mergers and acquisitions. We've actually convinced them to get us involved sooner now than letting us know, oh, by the way, we acquired a company. And then also Tech Guru, we're looking to grow through acquisition as well.
Right.
Thanks.
Great. And Dan has fielded calls from me late at night or on the weekend, so they are the technology company that cares, because he's been able to take care of me, and I appreciate that. So let's come back to Sean, and why don't we hear a little bit more from everybody about kind of this topic, how you fit, key takeaways that you want the audience to have from your perspective.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier to sell today than it was in 2008, 2009 timeframe. And so having a plan, if you know your number, as financial planners say, know your number. Is it 2 million? Is it 20 million? Whatever that plan is, make sure you know it and you can work backwards. In my world, it's all numbers. You know, we could easily figure out if it's a $5 million payday, 3 million is going to go to taxes, so that means that you really need to sell it for $8 million. How do you get it to $8 million? Is it a multiple of 5 or 7 or 10? So from a pure numbers standpoint, bean counters can figure that out, and we can certainly work with you. So that's part of that proactive planning. Figure out what you're going to do, how much you need. Do you want it to go transition to your kids? What kind of payday do you really need at the very end?
Great, thank you. Peggy.
Yeah, I'll echo some of the same things. It's really, we fit in up front. The best time to really start having these conversations is, 2, 3, or more years before you're ready to sell. While you guys can do a great job, Sean, with the numbers, we really focus more on some of the intangible aspects of the business and things that you could do to help grow your value other than just through numbers. For example, having a good management team in place so you can go on vacation for 2 months and hopefully they won't miss you too much. That's a good thing. So we'll work with sellers to help understand how to get their business structured to help maximize the value and increase the multiple that they're going to get.
Great, thank you. Dan.
Thank you. So when it comes to selling the business, maybe what I'll do is take a look at it from the acquiring standpoint. And what we're looking for is companies that are leveraging technology in a unique way, and that's really driving their competitive advantage in the marketplace. And that can be in one of two ways, either internal operations, where there's tech and apps they're using to automate and streamline processes and just be more effective and efficient and more productive and have better customer service than the rest of the competitors. And then another way to do it is on the customer-facing side, which is making it easier to do business with your company from the outside. Another thing that we're looking for is when acquiring a company, hey, who's using similar complementary software that we're using that'll make it easier to bring them into our way of doing things. And then I can get into the more detail, but at the very least, using some industry-specific software, not just Word and Excel, to run your business.
You mean there are other softwares?
No, love their software, just to be clear, but something more. Thank you.
All right, Melissa.
Yeah, so I think the theme that you're going to hear throughout this panel today, with 3 out of the 5 people up here being CPAs, is to have a plan, have a process. And it's amazing to me still, after 15 years of lending, the emotion that gets wrapped up into a deal. Whether you're the seller, whether you're a buyer, it is really an emotional process. And no matter what you do, it is really tricky to take the emotion out of a deal. So we'll get into some more questions and highlight a few things, but what I just want to mention is to remember to check your emotions at the door and really use a process, use a plan, and lean on those, that board of advisors or the group that you surround yourself to help with any acquisition.
Great, thank you. Tom?
Well, Rick, you mentioned some numbers. I have a few more. Typically, up to 90% of the business owner's net worth is wrapped up in their closely held business. So we're not talking about an insignificant asset. There will be a business owner turn 65 every 59 seconds for the next 15 years. So while it may be a seller's market today, eventually that could catch up to us. Recent Pepperdine University study indicated 64% of today's business owners plan to sell in the next 10 years. 75% of them will never sell. And out of that $10 million, Rick, it's estimated that 3 trillion will fail to be realized because owners fail to plan for their eventual sale. So that's what we do is basically help owners plan for their exit, get the business positioned properly, and then execute on the plan. Growing business value and getting a business ready for sale requires a team. You need your accountant, your attorney, your wealth advisor, probably an IT consultant, HR people, etc., to help you get the business ready. Sometimes we fill one of those roles, but usually we just fill the quarterback role, which is making sure that the business has a plan to grow its value and for the owner to eventually transition out, and then we hound and nag and cajole the business owner to make sure they actually execute on their plan. Best example I can give you of what we do, there's a $25 million manufacturer here in the Twin Cities who's 60 years old. He reached out to us about 3 months ago and said, I think I want to get out of business in the next 3 to 5 years. Can you help me get started? So obviously what we did first was try to put down a baseline or preliminary estimate of the value, then figure out what he and his wife needed in retirement, measured the gap. Then we did what we call seller due diligence, which is anytime somebody's going to buy your business, they're going to bring somebody in to look at everything. We do that in advance, which is more of an educational process for the owners to understand what's going to be looked at, but it does give the owner then a chance to clean up any messes or warts and pimples that might be hanging around. So we get the attorney involved to make sure that all the corporate documents are up to date. We get the accounting firm involved so that the tax planning can be done ahead of time instead of after the letter of intent is issued, which is a poor time to try and do tax planning when you already have an offer. We get the wealth advisor in place so that based on the expected proceeds, how do you preserve that wealth for the owner and what kind of cash flow will they receive out of it? So that's what our role in this process is.
All right. While we're down there, why don't we just stay with you, Tom, and we'll kind of work our way back. Specific question for you. What steps are involved in taking control of the exit for a business? How long does it really take? And can you kind of walk somebody through that process?
Yeah, basically you got to start with the end in mind, which is when do you want out and how much do you need, and work backward, but you got to have a baseline value in the business. Doesn't have to be an expensive formal valuation process, but it's just something for the owner to start with, and then they stack up the rest of their chips with other assets, and then how much do you need to generate the kind of cash flow that you need in retirement. We focus a lot on what are you going to do when you get out of business. because from personal experience, when you don't have that business to go to anymore, you get a little antsy. So you got to have a plan for what you're going to do with your time. You need to pull your advisors in, get their input, and get your plan in writing in case you're not around to execute on it. And we always say that you need 2 to 5 years in advance of the exit to get everything pulled together. So I tell clients, so if you can predict with absolute certainty 2 years before you die, become disabled, get a divorce, or have a dispute with your business partner, then start then. Otherwise, maybe you ought to just start now, just in case.
And then, so Tom, vacuuming the living room 12 out of 14 days, that's not a plan for spending your time?
That would be nervous energy. Right?
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, just checking.
Got to accomplish something every day.
All right, so coming back this way, Melissa, one of the questions that a lot of people have is engaging with the banker. Tell us a little bit about kind of how early they should engage with you, whether they're a buyer or a seller, and kind of how does that relationship go? I think not everybody in the audience or out in the general business community kind of understands that, so maybe you could help them with that.
Sure. Yeah, so as a buyer or a seller, it's important to engage with your banker early on in the process, assuming you have a good business banker. If you don't, there's a lot of amazing ones out there and you should find one. So with regards to the business banking and from a seller's perspective, I recently got a call from one of my clients and he wanted to get together, talk about his business, came to sit down, and about 2 minutes in the conversation, he said, I'm thinking about selling my business. So fast forward 2 years, he is working with an M&A consulting firm, had the business listed, got multiple offers, and just sold his business for $20 million. So then I had another phone call a couple weeks ago. A controller reached out to me. He is managing about a $10 million manufacturing firm, and he wanted to get together, doesn't bank with me, talk about business and banking in general. And similarly, a couple of minutes into the conversation, turns out he had been approached by a competitor and wanted to brainstorm about next steps in selling the business. So he called the owner in, we had a meeting and talked about the owner's goals and sort of the big picture items, if he was prepared to sell personally, and kind of discuss those things, and then talk about the financials. And turns out after the recession, 2012, 13, 14 were all good years for the company. But 15 was pretty flat, break even. In 2016, the company actually showed a loss and revenue was down. So rather than talk about next steps with this competitor that's looking at buying them, figuring out this owner doesn't really need to sell now. I mean, he could, but doesn't need to, doesn't really have a plan, but just was excited that a competitor was interested in buying the company. We talked, and basically the advice I gave him, along with referring him to some other advisors, was now is not a good time to sell. Coming off a break-even year and then a loss, you're not going to get the value that you have built up over this business the past 20 years. So then he was asking questions about an asset sale, and oh, well, I'm a manufacturer of all these assets. Well, that's fine, but Peggy will tell you that cash flow is what matters to a buyer. It's not how much assets you have on the balance sheet or a net worth. So yeah, so having those conversations with a business banker early on and not showing your hand too soon to a potential buyer is really important. And then I did end up asking this controller and the owner of the company, I was interested that they called me, and it was nice to talk through this, but what about your bank? Have you talked to your banker? And they're at a big bank, and he said their banker changes every 4 to 6 months. He wasn't even sure who to call, but knew that my name was out there in this M&A world, and was able to have a conversation. So
Great, thank you. Dan, I think people understand or go through the experiences of selling their house. Analogy I would be that if you invest in a kitchen or a bathroom, that's a good kind of investment when it comes times to sell your house. From a tech perspective, you mentioned productivity tools and training earlier on. Talk a little bit about, from a tech perspective, what's a good investment, and likewise, maybe there's some things that people get talked into buying that isn't quite as good of an investment.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. So the house analogy is a great one because your business, is Tom mentioned, is going to be one of your biggest assets. And so questions that we get a lot of the time when we're working with our clients on the technology side is, where can we get the biggest lift in productivity, in profitability from our investments in technology? And so of course it varies, from company to company, but I'll just give you some rules of thumb. Sometimes we find that the quickest lift can just be monitorizing and getting some better hardware. Did you guys realize, I don't know what size monitors are on your desks. Nowadays, in some cases, we're putting 43-inch monitors on people's desks. And it's actually less expensive for that kind of monitor real estate than getting full. In some cases, people had 2 or 4 individual monitors. More cost effective now. So what people, I guess, we help them realize is that with the developments in technology moving forward as quickly as it is, the economics are sometimes totally different. So spending, we're talking maybe $1,000 on a 43-inch monitor could replace 4 individual smaller monitors and give someone the real estate on their computer that they need to be even more productive, and it's not huge, not a huge expenditure. So modernizing technology, mobile computing is more common, less expensive as it used to be, and you can help people work when and where they want to work. So replacing that desktop computer and trying to chain in someone to their desk and enabling them to work when and where they want with a faster laptop and maybe a monitor at home. Before you know it, you're capturing productive time that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to capture. And then, of course, modern software. So sometimes we run into companies where they're running versions of either Microsoft Office or other applications that they're just, people are having to do all kinds of workarounds and tweaks and wasting so much time when they could be, maybe some capital investment in some newer software and maybe even some training can help. And then my last point on this one is there's even some free tools out there, like internal, it's one of them is called Slack. Maybe you've seen the billboards. Internal chat software that can help smooth and improve the communication between teams and departments, because you can set up teams just really quick and easy with these, low-cost applications. I walk into some of my clients and I see them, Sally at the front desk calling, Rick over there, and I'm like, what's going on? Why are they calling each other and tying each other up on the phone, and there's customers waiting or whatever? And it could have just been a quick message on the computer. So using new applications, a lot of times they're free or very low cost, and then training and enabling your team to use them effectively. Just a couple thoughts.
One thing that maybe isn't worth it as far as an investment?
So I would just say security is super, super important, and backup is really important, and it is, like many other things in business, can become a never-ending money pit as well. So be sure that you understand your, I'm going to use a fancy kind of technical term here, but kind of a disaster recovery objective. Just know that, hey, we want to be up and running in a day or two in the case of a system failure, to decide and drive how much you'll spend on new security and disaster recovery techniques. And the other money pit, again, not so different than the house analogy or even like in a car analogy, is people putting in and spending tons and tons of money to maintain some old kind of legacy piece of software. I'm sure that I bet half of the folks in the room would raise their hand if they had some legacy piece of software in their business. They just have to keep patching and trying to keep it going just a little longer. When instead, you could put that money into, some newer technology that would work better.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
So Peggy, you've sold your own business, so you came at things from the operating side before you went to Sunbelt. Now you're at Sunbelt, so you understand kind of both sides of selling your business. In your experience, what are business owners most surprised by when they go down this path, first exploring it and then later actually doing it?
Yeah, there's a few things, and I think Melissa really hit on one of them, is that cash flow is the driver. That is what buyers are really looking for. So when we sit down with people and share, hey, here's your cash flow amount, and that amount needs to give the buyer a good salary and pay down all the debt and still have some cushion left, and kind of walk through that, you know, just because they have a $100,000 machine doesn't mean anything if it's not producing cash flow. So that's one thing that some people are really surprised by. The other thing I would say is, you know, they've been told, minimize your taxes, minimize your taxes. You know, you can run a lot of different expenses through your business. And one thing that kind of hits home is that they realize that, hey, by running these through, if I'm going to bank finance this deal, a lot of banks won't necessarily add those expenses back. So making sure that if you're 2, 3, 5 years out, stop running a lot of the extras through, because you're going to get 3 to 5 times that back, if not more. So you save, you know, $100 in taxes, but it just costs you probably $300 or more in price.
Okay.
So that's surprised.
Melissa, you were smiling at that. I think you would concur.
Yes, yeah, it's amazing. And then people get fancy with these add backs. You know, you see these financial statements and, oh, you can add this back and add this back. And it's really messy, and the buyers, they discount that. And it is tough to get bank financing, because it's like, okay, what's legit? And well, this insurance was actually paying for this instead of for this. Well, do you have any documentation to back that up? And it gets pretty convoluted.
And Tom, I saw you nodding over there.
Well, it's just because, you know, most business owners try to run their business using the tax minimization accounting policies. And then when it comes time to sell, they've got to come clean. And I don't know about you, but I don't want to go to confession with the IRS. So it's just not healthy. So prior to sale, start cleaning it up and start thinking about your financial statements as your brochure for somebody to buy the business. And you need to make it look as good as you possibly can. Obviously not fraudulent, but start running the financial practices and the accounting policies to maximize cash flow, not to minimize taxes.
Great, thank you. All right, jumping back down here, Sean, we haven't touched on the dynamics of family business yet. Obviously, that's a big part of a bunch of businesses out there. What advice do you have for owners who want to sell but also want to keep it in the hands of the family or maybe the management team that is already existing? In fact, I talked to somebody in the audience earlier about that conversation exactly. So help us understand that issue.
Yeah, so besides having a plan, you know, it could be an ESOP, it could be an executive comp plan, it could be, you know, a bunch of different things, deferred comp or whatnot, but ultimately you have to have a plan. And if you want your son to buy it and you want some cash flow from it, you know, does your son have enough money? Does that key manager have enough money? Do you have the non-competes in place or the non-solicitations in place? Do you have all that stuff in the background noise just to make sure the deal gets done? Because ultimately your son or your key person is running this business and you need a little piece for retirement. You don't want to take it back in 2 years or 3 years when he's ran it into the ground. And so at that point, you know, if you're selling it to a family member, make sure he's trained. You know, maybe he has to go to a different job to get some outside training. We had a client that turned out perfect. Mom and dad, they lived to mid-90s. They had a 15-year payout from the son. They didn't need the cash, but they wanted to make sure because they've had long life expectancies in their family. And here it was a $250,000 payment for 15 years. Well, the son got off great. He got a tax deduction every year. The parents picked it up as income. He didn't have a bank loan at that point, so he could go buy, he could go expand the business. You know, the baby boomers versus millennials, there's a little different capacity to take on debt, especially at different age brackets and stuff like that. And the baby boomers, whether they use crowdfunding or they use Melissa or whatnot, they're not afraid to take on a lot more debt than the people on the backside of their careers. And so there's a lot of ways to chase after how you're going to keep it to the family, but make sure those people are trained. Make sure they can run it. If you're expecting something, you want to make sure they're better than you are. So make sure you hire better talent than what you got you there. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Great. Okay, to remind everyone again, especially for the folks who haven't been here, this is also intended to be an interactive discussion. So if someone has questions, please raise their hand and I'll try to work you in. We have one in the back, and then I also have questions here, so we'll keep going, but to the extent possible, we'll weave you in. So the woman in the white jacket over there. Sure. So for those of you over here who didn't hear that, on a B2C business, how do you value influence metrics with the way the world is these days with social media and the different kinds of marketing channels and so forth? How do you try to put a value on that reach? One company I'm working with right now isn't up and running from a revenue perspective, but because of the kind of front running they've been doing on their product, they have basically pent up demand. And so how do you value that? And why don't we go to the panel here? I might lean towards Peggy, but there's also of like, is it cash flow? No. Okay, that's part of the answer. But anyway, Peggy, go ahead.
Yeah, that is a big part of the answer. I mean, obviously that is the direction that a lot of businesses are going, and they certainly want to capitalize on all of the social media options out there. But I will say from a buyer's perspective, just putting on your buyer hat, if you're going into the business and you think that business is doing everything they possibly can from a marketing perspective and the cash flow is here, they're not going to put a premium on that. It's going to be based on the cash flow. Whereas if the cash flow is here and you're not doing any marketing at all, then they might say, I can see a lot of big opportunities going forward. So it's kind of a little bit of a double-edged sword. You need to do it, obviously. You need to do it to grow your business, but I'm not sure you get a premium from doing that in and of itself. You get the premium from the additional revenue and cash flow that it drives.
I'd like to, so I'm not an expert in this by any means, but I do read a little bit about it. And I know that what I'm about to say is like very kind of short, but it's worth it to what it would be to somebody else. You ask, what's the value of that? Well, what's somebody willing to pay for it? So if somebody's looking to talk to your audience, they know that they can monetize that by having that specific, however your audience is defined, that kind of that market segment or persona, but they know that they've got that perfect offering. There's I think a pretty well documented case of where a kind of like nanny payroll company sold to Care.com, and it was a perfect example of where Care.com has the audience, and another would be very, very interested in selling nanny payroll services, and it was a perfect combination where the multiplier on the valuation was well beyond anything that you'd look at from cash flow and profitability, well beyond that. But because it was a combination of the audience and the product coming together, and if I understand correctly, the woman who started the nanny payroll company had been talking to and working with in like the Care.com leadership for a couple of years, and like to better understand kind of how that audience worked, and that was exactly the launch pad that she needed to take her business to the next level. And that's exactly one thing that Care.com was going to take their business to the next level in complementing what they're already selling to their existing subscriber base. So I think there can be a huge multiplier effect if you get it right.
I'd encourage you to look up the term vanity metrics. And so a vanity metric might be a download, and you're saying, oh, we got all these downloads, but guess what? If nobody's using it and you don't have engagement, the downloads aren't worth anything. So if you do a Google search on vanity metrics, you might kind of get a perspective on a good metric versus a not so good metric. One right here, Jerry.
Quick question, kind of a simple one. If you're planning on selling your business, is there a great value in having your income statement and balance sheet reviewed by the auditor?
So for those of you over there who maybe didn't hear it, what's the benefit between reviewing your financial statements versus auditing, and the benefit to the account, the benefit from either selling it, or I guess if you're looking at it buying. So Sean, why don't you touch on that, a review versus an audit?
What's the purchase price? So if you're talking $500,000, don't do either. If you're talking a $5 million deal, now you're going to start, the bank's going to require stuff, the investment guys might require stuff. If it's a $50 million deal, you're going to have an audited financial statement. But the purchaser ultimately is going to go in there and do the due diligence. And if it's a review, they're going to trust the review a little bit. If it's an audit, they're going to trust it a lot more. But ultimately, the due diligence will be done by the buyer. And same with what Tom said. He's preparing you. If he thinks it's going to need an audit, he's going to tell you that up front. On our side, we like to keep the price lower. And so if we know it's going to be an audited financial statement, we'll do it for a couple of years prior to it. But we won't throw that in on the front side from that standpoint. Does that help?
Anybody else want to chime in on that?
It doesn't matter whether it's reviewed or audited, just make sure it's right. Because they're going to come in and they're going to basically give your business an autopsy. So if you've got things that are off, and the classic example, I talked about the guy with the $25 million manufacturing business. We got a copy of his last 3 years' financial statements, and they didn't foot. You couldn't, he had the numbers up, and the expenses don't tie out. Well, obviously what happened was the print parameters for the financial statements excluded rent on the business premises. So the statements were off $200,000. Now, we figured it out and said, let's get that fixed. You could explain to a potential buyer, well, it's just our printer parameters weren't set up. But the first thing in that buyer's mind is, well, what the hell else is wrong here? If you can't even print out a financial statement that, that totals to the bottom. So I don't think it matters that much. If the buyer needs the thing audited, they're either going to do it themselves with a firm they want, or they'll accept your audited statements because they have to have an audit, not because you need one as the seller.
Peggy, Melissa, anything to add? No?
I guess I would echo a little bit. I mean, the small businesses don't need it, but there certainly is value, and it is one of the value drivers that we look at is the level of financial statement completion. Is it a compilation, a review, an audit? You do get a little premium for having audited financials, but it may or may not be worth that.
Okay. Let's go there, and now Herb, I'll get to you next, okay?
Is there any benefit to being a specific type of company, LLC versus an Inc. versus something else?
Only the tax treatment when you sell and how it's structured. If you're a C corporation, good luck to you. Because there's going to be double taxation. So if you're setting up a business, I mean, we always tell people an S corp or a limited liability company is the best way to go. It may not produce the lowest tax currently, but in the long term, if you're going to sell the business, Sean's much more qualified than I am.
Yeah, if you're a C Corp right now, there's ways around it. You can always say you get a compensation payment or a consulting agreement or whatnot and get paid that way to get it out of the C Corp. LLC, I mean, I won't worry about any of it from that standpoint. Don't go change it. There's a look-back period with the IRS if you change from a C to an S or a LLC or whatnot. So it's not that big of a deal. You don't want to be a C Corp necessarily. Most companies are not C Corps unless you got a shelter company over there that you're sending money off-site or whatnot.
Okay.
I would say most buyers are probably going to want to do an asset purchase, so they could care less what kind of organization you have.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Yeah, look at the contracts and stuff like that. If you're a C corporation, you have contracts with China, for instance, or you have contracts with somebody, you might need a stock sale. But most of the buyers will do asset sales from that standpoint. But I won't change anything if you're in the last 5 years of your career type deal.
Herb.
I just want to add a comment to the audited financial statements. You have a potential that if you don't have audited financial statements, you may limit the buyers that are available.
Okay.
Because if you have a publicly held company that is going to buy, or a company that might want to go public in the next 5 years, then they are going to have to acquire companies with audited financial statements, and that's going to put a wrinkle
Sure.
in their own operation.
Sure. Herb's firm invests in publicly held companies, so he knows a little bit about that. So if you didn't hear Herb over there, Herb was suggesting that the audited financials are the way to go because you might miss out on some of the buyers who want the audited because they're either public or thinking about going public. Good point. Thank you for sharing. All right. So we heard that there's not enough planning going on. There's certainly, in many instances, not enough runway in the plan. So why do you suppose the business owners fail to plan on this topic?
It's in their DNA, Rick. If you're an entrepreneur, you know it. Just look in the mirror. If you know an entrepreneur, you know that their personality traits, number one, they're a risk taker. I'm not talking about spending grocery money on a lottery ticket or going over the Niagara Falls in a barrel. I'm talking about taking calculated risks. And they think that they don't need to plan because when they're ready to go, they just figure they can figure out how to do it. So they don't need an exit plan. They're innovators, so they think they can just exit at will and they'll just come up with a way to do that, because they're so used to inventing or creating things. They're achievers, so they all have goals, but a successful exit is not anywhere near on their scorecard of a goal they have to achieve. They tolerate ambiguity, they thrive in it. But the number one trait of an entrepreneur is the need for control, and I call its ugly twin sister, I make the rules. They have an overwhelming urge to take control of everything. And no better example than Steve Jobs. Now, I talked about risk-taking and innovation, and that's certainly Steve Jobs. But above all, he was a control freak, and he makes the rules. So I don't know if you'd heard that Steve refused to put license plates on his car and was repeatedly ticketed for not having license plates. He parked in handicap spots, even though he didn't have a handicap sticker. He exceeded the speed limit with regularity because the rules didn't apply to him. He made his own. So that control feature in entrepreneurs, while it's a great thing to build a business, it blinds them for the need to create a plan in advance to exit the business. I think that's why they don't do it.
Great, thank you. Anyone else on that question?
Yeah, I think business owners are so busy keeping their business up and running and going after new endeavors and stuff like that, being tied down to chase after an attorney to do your estate plan isn't necessarily a high priority for them. That's why you have to mentor them. You have to have key people around them, whether it's your financial planner, your bank, or your accountant. It's all part of that. Everyone can take an hour or two out of the day. Make sure your spouse is there because that spouse usually is the driver for this piece of business. If you're going to your kids or whatnot, do I want it to go to little Johnny or little Bobby? And I don't want to decide, so I'm not going to make the decision. And so, that's it's a tough deal because they love them both. But Bobby's playing in the band down in Arizona, and Johnny's the next president. And so, who gets the business? It's hard because you want to take care of the one in Arizona, and you certainly know the one in Minnesota running the business can take care of himself. And so I think owners, they put off decision makings when it comes to that because the business is so easy for them. I know how to make a widget, or I know how to do this kind of product. It's just easier for them. And so they take the path of lesser of two evils.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I think it's for somebody that doesn't do it every day, it's a big task, and it's hard to know, where do I even start? I don't know what to do. I know I should do something, but I don't know where to start, so they go back to the factory floor and keep doing what they know how to do.
I'll just add, as a business owner myself, the reason that I had put this off for sure is because I just think I'm going to want to do this forever, and it's fun, and I'm having a good time. But of course, in my, optimism that we all entrepreneurs have forever, that this is just going to be great forever, and I'm going to love doing this forever, that turns out to sometimes not be the case. And so when I came to the realization that I might want to have some other adventures or might want to be able to try some different things, it was time to start thinking about it. And what I didn't want to have happen was start to figure that out too late, because I find when the closer you get to when you want to change something, the fewer options I would have available to me.
Somebody's buzzing over there. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the failing to plan, why. How does a business owner know when it's the right time, and how do they know when they're ready? Okay, somebody over here is buzzing.
They don't.
They don't, okay.
They don't know when the right time is. Sometimes they get approached, and then they get to thinking, and usually it's at the end of a 70-hour week, and they go, this is BS. I really ought to start listening to these people. Until they get the number, and then you've never seen people fall in love again with their business so quick as they do when they get the number.
And it's not what they want.
It's $2 million less than they thought it was worth.
Yeah.
You don't know when the right time is, which is why you really ought to plan for it so that when it arrives, you're all set up. Because you'll get approached by a competitor. Somebody will reach out. Peggy will reach out and say, I got a buyer for your business. And you've done no thinking about, well, is now the right time? When is the right time? Because that's not how entrepreneurs are built.
Anybody
Talked
else?
about those DNA traits in an entrepreneur. The only thing worse than trying to get them to do exit planning is get them to buy life insurance and plan their funeral. They think they're going to be around forever.
Sean?
Yeah, so having that advisory group right there, the financial planner, as you mentioned, if your number is 5 million, 7 million, whatever the number is, it's a lot easier to swallow when you say, gosh, my valuation is 12 million, I'm going to get that $5 million. And so then it's like, I've got my number. I know what I need to live on. I know where I can go if I'm in Florida or wherever I want to be. So having the right advisors around you and meeting, quarterly or semi-annually, however often you do, it keeps everything in front of you, so you're planning. Same way you plan to have a successful business, you're planning that next successful part of your life.
Yeah, I would just add that a lot of times, most every business owner, if they've been around for a while, they get approached by a competitor, by somebody else. And most business owners that I talk to have been approached multiple times and they didn't sell. So it's not like I haven't been approached before. I find it usually comes down to a personal reason. There's something today that's triggering them to be ready to sell. Whether it's, I'm just tired and I want to retire, or I want to get traveling in, or a health reason. It's a personal reason generally is what triggers someone to want to move on.
Yeah, I'd just like to contribute. The way that I'm thinking about this currently with my own company and with my business partner is we thought, okay, well, we've been intentional about every other thing we've set out to do with Tech Guru, with our marketing, with our operations, with our customer service. Why not be intentional about the end, the exit, as it were? So every time I get approached by whoever wants to buy my company, I kind of generally will take the call and I ask them all those questions like, okay, what are you looking for? What's going to give the highest valuation in this industry, in my industry? I just grill them. And I've been working to get the business to the point over the years to get, they said, okay, well, 10 million revenue or 1 million EBITDA is like the magic number where, you can start to get a lot of interest in this type of company. So now okay, we're not there yet, we're working towards it. They want systems and processes. They want high quality people, because a lot of times in IT in particular, there's a very low unemployment rate. So they said, we want to make sure that your people are loyal and that they're well trained and that they're going to stick around, and that your customers, that it's sticky. So they gave me this, I kind of had created this punch list of what they're looking for in a company, and then I want to get to the point where, you know, I'm going to go and pitch the kind of companies that I want to sell Tech Guru to when the time is right. When I'm ready to do it, I'm going to be intentional about it. That's just how I'm thinking about it.
Great, thanks. Anything?
We're good.
All right. We talked a little bit earlier about technology investments with Dan. What are some other investments that would be helpful to growing companies, creating more value and then protecting the value that you have created?
I think the biggest thing is what Dan just hit on, the people. You want to have good quality people, and investing in your people is one of the most important things you can do. That's what's going to drive the business going forward. That's what's going to help grow it and help make it a more valuable company.
When I talk to my clients that are selling their business, the 4 things that buyers typically look for are the growth potential of the business, the industry that the business is in, the cash flow of the business, and like Peggy said, the people. And so a lot of the buyers will want to meet the people and have conversations ahead of time. And if I'm working with the seller, I say, no way. You're not allowing those buyers to have any of those conversations with the sellers. The other thing is the management structure. So what are the layers of management? Who's doing what? Do you have processes, handbooks? Is all this information transferable? It's amazing within smaller companies how roles are just sort of loose between people and everyone sort of knows what that person is doing without anything written down. But as a seller, when you're preparing to sell your business, it's important to document all the roles and be really clear with the buyers on that management structure.
Okay.
Example of, we just got a call from an attorney who wanted us to meet with one of his clients, $5 million business in the trades. The owner he's been working ungodly hours, he's burnt out, he's got high turnover, he can't find people, and if you've got any kind of trades business here in the Twin Cities, you know how hard it is to find electricians and plumbers, etc. So he decided he was going to sell his business. And he entertained 2 offers, and both of them wanted to talk to his people. So he let the potential buyers on 2 separate occasions do write-arounds with his people. Both of them came in at least $1 million less than what he thought the business was worth. And within a month, both of his best employees left for other opportunities because they knew he was thinking about selling the business.
Oh my gosh.
So, I mean, and he did all of this without ever talking to his CPA, his attorney, anybody like Peggy. He just, you know, it's back to the entrepreneur, I can do it myself. And he screwed it all up.
Oh.
And then he wanted us to help him sell the business, and we passed because he's just not built for following directions and being disciplined.
Yeah, you're spending on efficient operations and stuff like that, positive cash flow. So the stuff that goes along with that, you definitely want to spend. You know, make sure your customers have good contracts. The ones that have bad contracts, you know, get out of. Same with some of your vendors and stuff like that. If you have great terms, make sure that potential buyer is going to do that. That costs money from the legal side to set up some of those contracts and stuff like that. But it's better to have those non-competes, non-solicitations. It's better to have all those contracts documented and signed as you're growing, because you never know if that buyer is going to be today or tomorrow or in 2 years or whatnot. But if you have all those things signed and documented, it makes it look a lot prettier.
Great, thanks. Mike?
Okay, panel, I'm going to do this to you. All 5 of you have horror stories that you can share with entrepreneurs. Let's not scare them out of the room. But the worst phone call that I get as an advisor is the guy that calls up and says, "Well, I've been talking to a competitor and we've got an LOI in place, but we need to get ready to sell." Tom, you know what I'm talking about.
Of course.
Entrepreneurs get one chance at a business. It may be the only business they've had in their lives. Maybe even Peggy can speak to this. I you that they're employable after the acquisition. There's all kinds of things that are going on, but how do you respond to the entrepreneur that says, I can do it by themselves? I want you to go a step further, Tom. Talk about, you're talking to maybe with one other company, how do you draw other best practices in to get that highest valuation, highest price?
So for the people on that side of the room, if you didn't hear it, basically it was these folks get a chance one time to sell their business. There's a personality profile that probably leads to the do-it-yourself crowd. Horror stories on how they muck that up. Anyway, panel.
I have had that situation before where I get the phone call saying I'm negotiating the sale of the business, et cetera, and I said, well, what are you going to get for the business? And the client throws a number out. I said, is that all? And there was absolute silence on the phone. And then what do you mean? And I said, well, is that what your business is worth? And he goes, well, I don't know. I said, well, maybe we ought to find out first, unless you just like to be taken advantage of, which of course just drove this guy nuts. So you back the process up. And in his situation, he ended up going to market with the business, and he should, because I'd been hounding him for years. He was 80 years old, still actively involved in the business. And he always told me, I'm going to live forever, unless I get shot by a jealous husband. And he did really think, and by the way, he passed away last year at 99, so he almost made it. But he sold the business, but what we got him to back up and then go through evaluation and then go find a strategic buyer, financial buyer like private equity. And then I said, you built a management team so that you can take all this vacation, why don't you give them a shot? And in the end, he actually took the lowest offer. He let his management team buy it. And he got a ton of money out of the business. The management team found an investor, and the business stayed in his community. The employees were all taken care of, and so, well, anyway, you got to back them up, because most entrepreneurs got their head down and they're running 100 miles an hour, and they're going to do some dumb things occasionally. And so get them to back up, sit down, and think about it.
May I,
Yeah.
So as the dumb entrepreneur has done dumb things, the best thing for me was to get some structure and a system. And for me, that was the entrepreneurial operating system. I mentioned it before, that it was what we implemented at Tech Guru. And it was, it's in the book Traction. You can DIY, do it yourself, or you can work with an implementer, either way. And we did it ourselves. And it gave me the structure to get crystal clear on what the heck did I want from this business in the first place. And I got everybody on my team crystal clear and aligned together for the first time ever. We went from burning people out and me being to want to sell the thing to the next person who walked in the door, to creating a really sustainable, healthy, fast growth company that I was, now I really, like I said, I really am work very much part-time. Loved EOS so much, I went and got certified as an implementer. But it got us clear on who the right people are for the company, what is our culture, and then it's got us to the point where we were turning people over all the time. We have people that stick around. It's all the best practices that each and every one of the experts have mentioned here, boiled down to one system, one language, one operating system, and it can cost almost nothing to implement it. Mm-hmm. It's simple, but not easy.
I'm going to go back to your horror story quick. We typically either don't see those or see them after they've failed. We've had a number of companies that have come to us and said, hey, I've gotten these 2 offers, but I'm not sure that they're really the right price. And that's where we come into play. So I don't necessarily see the horror side of it. I know in those cases when we bring it to the market and open it up to strategic buyers, we're often able to bring in many other offers, and generally at a substantial premium to that first offer. Because what we see is that one buyer is no buyer. They take their time. They do a lot of due diligence. They poke around. 6 months later, they decide, no, I'm not going to buy that. So by having some pressure on them, knowing that they're not the only game in town, that helps to ensure you get a better price, and it helps to ensure a quicker transaction.
I want to add the horror story so that maybe you guys can play off it. I had a client 4 years ago that was approached by a strategic buyer out of Europe. Offered $8 million for a real blue-collar type of processing business. The time the LOI was signed, it was $8 million. By the time they got down to the bottom and did the due diligence, probably under 5 when they pulled the plug on it. And we asked them, what do you think the business is worth? Business valuation later, business valuation came out at $24 million. Eventually we brought in an investment banker because of the size of the business. They got $33 million out of the sale of the business, plus they were able to keep the real estate because we were able to pull back on it. We were able to go to market with it, and we were able to see what they were going to get, and they were able to maximize, and they were so happy with the advisory team at that point. And it was all on them because they did it right, but they were able to, pulling the plug on an offer, even at $5 million, was very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's no buyer wants to overpay.
And that is not isolated. This
No.
happens every day of the year.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't think that's a horror story.
Well,
We had a similar
it
deal.
could have been, it was that
Yeah.
close. They were within a day of signing.
Yeah, we had a owner that was, I want $8 million. He ended up getting 60. And it was just us bringing it to an investment banker. We were like, you've got more than that, from that standpoint. Going back to your horror, going back to the horror story, we had a new client a couple of years ago, and his dad died. And there wasn't a lot of documentation. So the kids ended up buying out the mom for a premium to take care of her. Now the kids aren't going to Christmas together. The one son had to fire the other son. And so the value of the business has come back around, but he's paid for it more and more over and over again from that standpoint in the last couple of years. And so it was just, there wasn't a lot of documentation, there wasn't values, there wasn't buy-sell agreements, there wasn't anything. And so here the one son, not talking to his brother, he still has good terms with his mom, he paid her a nice check, but that was a horror story living through it the last couple of years.
I would have to say most of the time the business owners overestimates the value, not underestimates it as far as your example. They just have a number in their mind, but they have no basis for the number.
I have a story too, Rick, unless you want to go to
No, go for it.
So, knock on wood, I haven't had any of my clients sell their business without a process, which I am knocking on wood because I know it happens. But I have a client right now on the other side that's really taking advantage of a business, a sale opportunity. So a client of mine was looking at buying different companies and started negotiating with this one company and hired an advisor to help in this company in his industry, and I won't say the industry just for confidentiality reasons. Woman-owned business, and the woman's husband is dying of cancer, and she needs to get out. And so she is selling the business to him at a very low price. The valuation came in much higher than the purchase price, and the buyer isn't obligated to share what the purchase price is. The buyer has a team of advisors around him supporting him with the purchase, but she didn't have an exit plan, didn't have a strategy in place, didn't have key management to turn the business to, and is really now just needs to sell. And so my client, I wouldn't say is taking advantage of that, but is looking at an opportunity, and we'll pay her some consulting and other things. But it truly, it's a sad situation. It is what you'd call a horror story on the seller side, that she didn't expect to have to sell the business in this way because she's personally having to take care of things. So it's, without a plan, that's the thing we get back to in earlier. People don't want to plan for the unexpected or the unfortunate circumstances, and so they don't.
Somebody else, why don't we, let's hit this guy first in the gray jacket.
Melissa, earlier you had commented that you encourage people to check their emotions at the door.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing it's not that easy.
No.
How do you guys manage?
We tell our clients that's our job, is to control your emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And we have little signals like it's time for you to leave the meeting.
And to just be able to, whether you're on the sale side or the buy side, be able to walk away. at any time. I mean, don't get so invested in the opportunity that you cannot walk away. But it's like anything. I mean, we're driven by emotion. It is extremely challenging. Every deal that we work on. I mean, even at the closing table, it's high emotion. It could be hugs, it could be handshakes, it could be whatever, but it's an extremely emotional process, and people are willing to overlook key things on both the sell side and the buy side because they're so wrapped up emotionally.
Anybody else?
Yeah, that, everyone's got that little thing that, gosh, I love this glass, I want to take it with me. or I've got that picture, my name's on the wall. And you do have to check that emotion. And a lot of the times it's a long process to do that. The check signing, that's the easy portion. The emotional thing, I'm going to vacuum the next 12 days, is not, have a plan to go somewhere. Have hobbies, have stuff that you're, whether it's golf or whether it's hunting or whatever, it's motorcycles or whatnot, have a plan after D-Day. And do it while you're working as well.
Golf keep working.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
What do you see as the market's appetite for B2B services companies? And then if there is still an appetite, or if there is an appetite, what are the drivers of valuation for those types of entities that don't have physical assets like a manufacturing firm?
You didn't hear it on the other side. What's the market for B2B services businesses? And if they're not driven by assets, what things might they be driven by?
They're driven by the same things any business value is driven by, which is, do you have a management team so you're now, can be dispensable? Do you have a decent, diversified customer base, not over-concentration in one? Do you have good business processes, and are they documented so that if you're gone, the business continues to operate because everybody knows the process? Do you have a plan for strategic growth? Is cash flow growing? Unless you have patents or something special from a technology standpoint, every business, that's basically what drives value. As a buyer, you want to buy future cash flow, and you want it to go up. And so the only way it's going to happen is you've got a management team so the owner can leave, and you've got good customers, and you've got great processes, and you've got good cash flow, and it's growing. It doesn't matter what the company does.
I would add one other thing. Anything you can do to have contracted revenue coming in is definitely a value driver, and buyers look for that. And just to answer your B2B question, yes, there's a lot of buyers out there that are looking for a B2B service type business.
I agree.
Yeah, talk to your neighbor right there, Mike. In our industry, it's a lot of that contracts and stuff like that are good, but if you're selling, make sure you're looking at a specific niche your buyer's looking at, for instance. A lot of that, you don't need to have a lot of physical assets. As long as you have positive cash flow, if it's a strategic buyer, they're gonna exponate that cash flow for you, just by going into this market or that market, because you already deal with a bunch of accountants, for instance. You're gonna get a bigger multiple. Right now, it's great multiples.
Okay, to remind everybody, I'll do a hard stop at 1. We can keep the room as long as anyone wants to say. Last question from the floor, Herb, and then I'll do a little wrap up here.
I've got a question for Melissa. If you have a customer that is in the process of selling the business, the question, do you provide financing for the buyer?
Yes.
And if you do that, is there a potential conflict of interest?
Our attorneys have said that there is not a conflict of interest. We have financed a lot of, I won't say a lot, but a number of buyers that are buying businesses that are in our portfolio. And as long as they have their own representation, we've been doing that. In fact, the one I'm working on right now, it's a stock sale. So the buyer is actually inheriting the debt. So we're not redoing any of the paperwork. So we've provided, our client all the security agreements and things that have been signed. So it can be pretty straightforward for a new buyer to come in and use the bank that's been involved with the business. Mm-hmm. Good question.
Good question, thank you. Okay, so 2 kind of summary questions for the panel. Everybody can 30 seconds to a minute on an answer. What's one thing that a business owner should remember to avoid, one mistake not to make? And then I'll follow that. The next question would be, hey, do this. But anyway, mistakes to avoid.
Start planning today.
Okay.
I would say that do not tell your employees, maintain confidentiality. You don't want to have happen what happened to the gentleman that tried to sell his business and lost his 2 key employees. So keep it confidential.
See, if you can work it out to have your tech people take a look at the technology of whatever company you're looking to acquire, or have your technology evaluated going into selling. Get us involved, get your tech people involved or earlier, and let us know your intentions. We can help.
Sure. On the buyer side, it's kind of funny. Don't buy a business that you don't want to work. So I've had clients that bought a cleaning company and they ended up being the backup cleaners. I've had a person buy a chauffeur company. He was the backup chauffeur and they didn't like the business. So whether you're a seller negotiating with a buyer, or if you're a buyer, just make sure when you're buying a business, you buy something that you're willing to work in.
That's good.
What to avoid is to think that you're always the smartest person in the room in every situation. So even if you think you are, get a second opinion. Rely on some outside help.
Okay, then to close it up, things to do. Let's say somebody's gone through the process of evaluating their situation, their personal needs, where they are in their life and career. I've talked to some of their advisors. They've assembled a team. They've done those kinds of things, or actually at least evaluated assembling a team. What should they do? Doesn't have to be limited to one, but what are a couple of things that they might do now that that decision has been made and going forward?
Make sure the spouse is on board.
Spouse on board.
Yep.
All right.
Keep their keep their foot on the pedal. Oftentimes we see people are like, okay, I'm selling, and they start not showing up as much, and then the sales start dropping, and then their business becomes less valuable.
Okay, I'm going to harp on the pick a system, entrepreneurial operating system. Whatever system you pick, I don't care which one it is. We see so many people picking and putting multiple different things together. Just pick one and go with it to get everybody in your leadership team clear on the vision and supporting the direction of the company, getting traction so you're looking at the numbers on a regular basis so you can make smart decisions in a timely manner before it's too late. In other words, not just looking at trailing indicators, but looking at leading indicators. Ultimately get your entire company kind of rowing in the same direction, speaking the same language. Really cannot go wrong if you do that.
That was a little subtle commercial for Gopher football, rowing in the right direction, right? Okay, Melissa?
Yeah, I have 2 things. We don't have an attorney up here today, so I'll just say to get well represented. I've worked with some pretty incompetent attorneys out there. And so whether you're a seller or a buyer, get good representation around you. There's a lot of good M&A folks. And also if you're transferring between one generation to the other, I also recommend that both parties have their own representation. There's attorneys that do a lot of neutral drafting, and it may not be good for the family down the road, especially if there's some family members that aren't going to be involved in the business after the sale. I just recommend that both parties have good representation. And then I'm going to say also to be well capitalized, to get the funding and get the financing in place that you may need for your business for the future. Bankers are really good at giving you an umbrella before it starts raining, but once it starts raining, they're really good at taking it away or not giving you one when you ask for it. So just make sure that your business is well capitalized.
Tom?
Yeah, I would say if you've got your plan set, you've worked with your advisors, you're moving the business along, cash flow is improving, I would say revisit your plan periodically. Because if you've got everything in place and things are working well, I'm guessing your cash flow's up, which means, geez, maybe I don't want to sell in the near term because I'm enjoying all the benefits from this new and improved business. But revisit the plan at least every other year.
Great, thank you. A couple of quick things. Again, we have the room as long as anyone wants to stay. Bring this little slip to get out of the parking ramp. The regular Club E meeting is next Thursday, and I paired this up with next Thursday's event. I have 3 business owners talking about growing their companies and then selling their companies. So if you're interested in what you heard today, come on Thursday, clube.com to RSVP for that event. And let's give the panel a round of applause.